Otherwise, you have to disturb your process piping to pick the upper half off. The other downside of this is that if you want to work on the stationary part in the upper half, you have to figure out some way to flip it over. And for relatively small machines, that's not too big, but for the refrigeration machine up to the CGF, it's a 30-ton part. And trying to flip over a 30-ton part inside that module is proven to be pretty problematic for the people up there. I think that's one reason why no one's gone into that machine in the last 22 years it's been operating. The third style is a barrel. This is for a high-pressure application. You have literally a barrel. It's a forging. It's a single piece that does the pressure containment. You've got a head on one end which holds all of the internals in place. And you have what's known as a bundle that slips into the cavity inside the barrel, and that holds the rotating part and then the stationary aerodynamic parts. Well, this could be a little lighter. It usually looks good on the computer at my office, but this is the barrel. It's a single-piece forging. The internal is then machined out, and you can tell, I think you might be able to tell, that they've actually done quite a bit of work to make sure this internal surface is extremely smooth. For two reasons: high cycle fatigue, plus the fact that you have to push the bundle in, and there's O-rings, which if it was a rough surface would get damaged on the insertion. Let's see, why did I do that one? Oh, that's right. You'll notice that on this bundle, the nozzles are welded onto the casing. That's not always the case. On this bundle, on this barrel, the barrel is so thick that they just machined the nozzle directly into the barrel forging. So here's your flange setup, and there's your bolts for bolting the flange to the compressor. Now, the same manufacturer will make all of these different style compressors. You'll notice here in the foreground, this is a horizontally split compressor, upper half, waiting to get put on the lower half so it can go to test. This is what we're called the bundle. This contains the shaft and the impellers and then the aerodynamic, the stationary aerodynamic section. And you can see it here in this picture. That's the rotor, and then you have all the different gas paths that the gas takes and does the actual conversion of velocity to static head. And that's what the rotor looks like once it's removed from the bundle. Centrifugal compressors are dynamic machines. Therefore, the performance depends on the proper interplay of aerodynamic motion. We must test these to verify the performance. And even though the vendors claim they've made them 1,000 times before, there's usually 1,000 minus one ways of having it not quite right. And so we make sure that we test them. So, polytropic head is a measurement of the pressurized machine, and this is how we test the machine against this ability to generate pressure. This is the equation, which we didn't memorize, on how to calculate the polytropic head required by the process. The compressibility of the gas is one of the factors. Suction temperature, compression ratio, and then the ratio of the specific heats of the gas are all important information that we need to have to be able to calculate the compressor head requirement properly. And mole weight. And you'll notice that the mole weight is directly in the denominator of this equation. It means that the head is inversely proportional, the head required is inversely proportional to the mole weight of the gas that we're using. Gas horsepower is the mass flow rate times the head divided by a constant and the efficiency. So we'll put some numbers against this so you can see what magnitudes we're looking at. For a compressor, using 433 million standard cubic foot a day, and these are the other flow rate conversions based on the suction conditions. Mole weight of 21,913, suction pressure of 361, and discharge pressure of 789, and these are the compressibility of the suction and the discharge, and overall efficiency at 84.2%, suction temperature of 104.9, and then these are the specific heats. Running through the calculations, the head required is 33,160 feet. This is the lift gas lower stage unit. Yeah, I thought it might. Typically, the head that we'll accept per impeller is between 8,000 and 12,000 foot. So given 33,000 foot ahead, this would either be a 3 or a 4 impeller compressor, and it turns out that the vendor selected 3 wheels for this installation. Now, given 33,160 foot ahead, the horsepower is 20,721 horsepower to make the mass flow rate that we're after. That's pretty typical for the kind of machines that we use on the upstream installations. Now, that's not how the vendors come up with head. The vendors determine the head requirement based on the geometry of the impellers. They will pick. We will give them the head that we want and all of those gas parameters that we have. And they will then go into their archives of different wheels, impellers that they have, and they will start to select wheels that will generate the head that we need. And all of those selections and all of the information that they have on those wheels were done by tests by the vendor at their test facilities on individual wheels with individual diaphragms to come up with the best aerodynamic performance available for that geometry. And what they'll do is that they'll take a wheel at the test facility, and by similitude they will break down all of the performance of that wheel into dimensionless numbers, which they call the flow coefficient, the head coefficient, and the efficiency. And they'll have that for each individual wheel. These are not dependent upon gas or pressure or speed. They're strictly dependent on a geometry. So once they've built up a set of wheels for us, then they'll come out and calculate the head. So that becomes the head coefficient. Head of the machine will be the head coefficient of each wheel times the number of wheels, or individually each wheel if they're all different families, times the tip speed squared divided by a constant. You'll notice none of this has anything to do with gas properties. This is strictly a geometry, number of wheels, and speed. All right, so that means that once he's made that selection, this is the head that machine is going to put out. If we go and make changes to the process, we may need to select different wheels with different head coefficients to be able to better match the machine to the new process requirements. Flow is the same thing. The flow coefficient times the speed times the diameter cubed divided by a constant. So what this means is that as you get further and further along in the production of a compressor, you have less and less opportunity to make process changes because you're locked into the geometry of the machine. It also means that centrifugal compressors are sensitive to mole weight and gas composition changes. We have to do the best that we can up front to get the process information for the machine right. It doesn't mean we can't change it if we need to, but the better we can do up front, the better off we are. We were just down at Solar last Friday, and we were talking to their compressor people down there. They told us that they had been on projects where the wheel selection had to be changed twice from the time that the project started until they were actually able to start the machine up because the gas composition changed on them significantly twice. Centrifugals don't handle low mole weight gases very well, and reciprocating compressors do a much better job of that. That's why you'll see a lot recips in hydrogen plants more than centrifugals. Centrifugals require surge protection, and they have a very sophisticated sealing system to try to keep the gas inside. But one nice thing, they are very flexible. If you take a look at this picture of a centrifugal compressor, you might think that this is the inlet because it's large, and as you compress the gas, it gets smaller in volume, and that would be the outlet, but that's not the case. It did work. This is the first stage inlet. And off of this nozzle, we're passing gas across these first 3 impellers. Once it gets to those 3, it comes out the first stage discharge. It goes off to some other aspect of the process. Depending on the gas, if it's become hot enough, this may be going to a cooler, it could be going to a dehydration unit, it could be going anywhere. But it can go ahead and leave the casing. Once it comes done with that process, it re-enters on the second stage nozzle and goes through these 4 stages of compression. And then there's a third inlet nozzle, and the gas from this third inlet nozzle mixes with the discharge off of this last impeller before going into this very last stage to finally exit from the discharge nozzle. So having different gas composition, or having gases come off at different pressures or enter at different pressures, can be done on a centrifugal. It's just a matter of locating the side stream nozzles at the appropriate wheel for it to work with. It also means, in some cases, you may have one process going through the first 3 wheels and then discharging, and a completely different process going across the other set of 4. So it can be a multi-use machine. We generally don't see that, but it is a possibility. Now obviously you want to have the machine operate as efficiently as you can, and so you don't want to have high pressure gas. And let me go, here it is. You don't want to have high pressure gas at this point attempting to leak back to the inlet at the lower pressure. It'll try to do that, but we don't want that. And so what we do is we have shaft seals at the impellers to try to block that passageway and make it a tortuous path so that the pressure drop is high so that the flow rate is low. And this is what these look like. They're called labyrinth seals. And the way they work is that there's a very close clearance to the shaft, and it acts basically like a series of annular orifices. You have a high pressure on one side, a low pressure on the other side, and the velocity across it causes a pressure drop, and you cascade the pressure drop, and the velocities eventually balance out so that you have a very high pressure drop with a low volume of gas going across it. This has quite a bit of interplay and with the overall efficiency of the machine. The better seal you have here, the higher the efficiency of the machine. But it also tells you that the leakage is not flow dependent, it's differential pressure dependent. And so if you have a low flow machine with a given differential pressure and a very high flow machine with the same differential pressure, the high flow machine will have a higher efficiency because this leakage will be a smaller percentage of the overall flow. So with that, it's 4:20. Been here almost an hour. Let's take our first break, and we'll come back and we'll talk about anti-surge control systems. There we go.